The Andor Finale was nothing short of a disaster, at least from an Imperial perspective. You can be sure that after the riot that went down on Ferrix, someone's head is going to be placed on a chopping block, but the question is, who will it be? And is that person really to blame for what went down? The easiest person to blame for the absolute mess that went down on Rix Road would probably be Dedra. After all, she was the leader of the operation and the commanding officer. So if anyone would be held directly responsible, it would probably be her. And if you take a look at how she conducted the entire operation, she did make some really questionable decisions. For the most part, she did get it right. She chose to keep the Imperial presence light during the funeral and specifically instructed for there to be no snipers on the roof in order to make sure that they wouldn't spook Cassian, allowing them to lure him into a false sense of security and then spring the trap on him, all of which makes quite a bit of sense. What she also got right was to try and keep the Imperial search for Cassian quiet, not wanting to alert the locals that the Imperials were after someone, possibly even trying to avoid provoking them to aid or help Cassian. So a covert operation as the funeral was being carried out was definitely the right choice. However, she also made a lot of questionable decisions. By issuing orders for a light Imperial presence at the funeral to not spook Cassian, she also potentially sacrificed the security of the HQ, and also lowered the chances of someone spotting Cassian. Sure, you don't want to spook the local people with a massive rollout, but at the very least, you could have at least placed a few soldiers in plain clothing and scatter them throughout the crowd. Using only scouts on the roof and a few guards at the Imperial HQ isn't a very effective strategy to catch someone in hiding. Had she decided to place more operatives throughout the crowd, they might have had a better chance of spotting Cassian. Now granted, they probably wouldn't have found anything since Cassian spent most of his time hiding indoor, but Dedra and the Imperials didn't really know that, at least not at first. So it's quite questionable as to why this wasn't done, especially if you worked for the ISB, which is effectively the Empire's secret police. You would think that they would have the knowledge and technical know-how to execute this sort of operation properly. The second and possibly the biggest mistake I think Dedra made was deciding to go and find Cassian herself. While she is an ISB officer, it's pretty clear that as the riot erupted, that she had very little combat experience. She's more of a desk officer than a field officer. So really, it's kinda questionable as to why she wanted to find Cassian personally. Not only did she lack the necessary skills and experience, I would argue that her decision to do so actually might have slowed down the efficiency of the operation. Instead, what she should have done is to pick out a few highly trained soldiers to infiltrate the building Cassian was in, or even go door to door to flush him out. If I was her, I would probably have picked out a squad of death troopers, or even use Attendant Corv as the mission leader, step back and let them do their job. Her walking around with her white coat really just sticks out like a sore thumb. Not to mention, Dedra is the person that oversees the entire operation. She's the person who makes all the decisions and needs to react accordingly. Executing an extraction mission should have been handed over to well-trained and well-equipped units like the Death Troopers or Stormtroopers. After all, that's what they are trained to do. Now, of course, Dedra's reasons for choosing to search for Cassian on her own is probably due to the overeagerness of her character. There is probably a touch of overconfidence, arrogance, and naivety, all of which, when mixed, leads to her making some questionable decisions that affected the outcome of the operation. Instead, with Dedra now also searching on the ground, there was no way she could have maintained oversight and managed all the moving parts, a flaw that is exposed later on as we talk about Captain Tigo. Certainly, Dedra was not the only one to make some questionable decisions. In fact, Captain Tigo actively went against her explicit orders by rolling out the troops in response to the funeral. His panicked response to the funeral and to Marva's speech is effectively what led to the beginning of the riots. There is no doubt that Tigo is an incompetent officer more concerned with looking the part than acting like it. He is over-enthusiastic and insecure about his position of power, which ultimately led to him reacting the way he did. You could definitely say that his decision to put more troops out on the street and to cover up Marva's speech definitely aggravated an already resentful crowd. What he should have done was attempted to de-escalate the situation using smokes and other crowd control methods to disperse the crowd. But worst of all was his decision to order stormtroopers to fire into the crowd after the explosion. which probably sealed the deal when it comes to labeling what went down on Ferrix as a disaster. You see, unlike his subordinate who recognized the importance of capturing the specific person who set off the bomb, his reaction was to gun down everyone guilty or innocent. Instead of arresting the culprit, all he managed to do was add to the body pile and further escalate the situation into a massacre. Really just making a mess out of the entire situation and probably cemented the people's resentment towards the Empire. You can be certain that moving past this event will be very difficult for the local people. Okay, we know that this guy was an incompetent leader to begin with, but what this also shows is Dedra's own failings. If at all, it shows that Dedra's decision to search for Cassian herself was the wrong one. Instead, by doing so, she has now created a situation where she is no longer in complete command of the entire operation. Because she has put herself outside the leadership position, she can no longer direct personnel while keeping the bigger picture in mind. By choosing to actively chase Cassian herself, she has effectively relinquished control to Tigo, who, as we know, makes bad decisions. In fact, on several occasions, Dedra should have already been aware of Tigo's incompetence after having to correct him a few times. She should have already anticipated Tigo's tendency to use disproportionate amount of force against the local people. Had Dedra decided to stay behind and let the Death Troopers do their job, she might have been able to overrule Tigo on the situation and manage it accordingly without agitating the crowd, or at the very least, ensuring that it would not turn violent. She would also be able to make sure that Tigo would follow her orders to the exact letter, but because she has also put herself outside this position, well, everything just goes to hell. It's sort of like a general who is overseeing a massive army just decides to jump into the front line, which really leaves no one to devise a proper strategy on the spot. So while Tigo is incompetent, it's also a massive miscalculation on Dedra's part. But just who exactly is to blame when the ISB learns about the situation? Well, what we might see here is that Dedra is going to get thrown under the bus. Much like how Cyril was thrown under the bus following his mishap while chasing Cassian, Dedra could very well follow the same fate. Following an investigation conducted by the ISB, it could very well conclude that Dedra made the wrong decisions that ultimately led to the riots and the subsequent violence. Major Patergas could perceive Dedra's failure to capture Cassian and manage the situation as a shortcoming, possibly undermining his confidence in her ability. And even if you felt that whatever went down wasn't Dedra's fault, it still might be perceived that way and might still be used by her rivals within the ISB. Blevin could very well use this as an opportunity to reclaim Ferrix, as he did lose it following his dispute with Dedra over jurisdictions, and Dedra's fall from grace would certainly provide that opportunity. In fact, if you go back a few episodes, you can actually see that Tigo and Blevin seem to have a very close and familiar relationship. The two of them are probably friends of some sort, so Blevin could leverage his relationship with Tigo to gather information on how Dedra messed up and present it to Patergas, as a way of exposing Dedra for her failures. In fact, Blevin might not even need to do anything for this to happen. Following the fallout on Ferrix, you can be sure that there will be some blaming going on. Dedra would probably blame Tigo for what went down and might even decide to make him the scapegoat. After all, he did go against her orders. But that being said, this might also lead to Captain Tigo to reach out to Blevin and offer him dirt against Dedra, as a way to secure his position and hedge against any possible loss in station. After all, if Blevin is still a friend who happens to have the same grudge as Dedra, I could very well see the two of them working together to bring her down. An alternative is that Dedra just labels the whole situation as a coordinated rebel attack and that the funeral was a cover for anti-imperial activity. And since she really couldn't have predicted the rebel plot, she might just get away with it. But even if this was the case, I don't think she would escape the situation completely unscathed. So regardless, I think Dedra is probably to blame, and rightly so. As the commander in charge, it does fall to her to take the blame whether the real faults lie with her or not. But besides the outcome, I think she's going to be in a lot of trouble come season 2. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.